So I know Josh already made this video, and I could care less honestly. India. Ever since Narun Karthikeyan showed up in Formula 1, the subcontinent has become a breeding ground for motorsport talent, with well-known racing series such as the MRF Challenge Series, and even fringe series such as the JK Tyre Novice Cup. It's unsurprising that we see another junior talent on the rise in the form of Jehan Daruvala. I want to take a deep dive into his junior career and see just what makes him so special, and believe me, the results are pretty spectacular. And I'm gonna go in depth a little bit more than Josh, so you should probably stick around. This is the first time I've done a video like this, so if you do enjoy, just do the thing that you normally do. Thank you. Like most junior talents, Jehan Daruvala went karting at the age of 13. A bit old for a karter when you consider that some of his rivals began karting at half that age. Nevertheless, he was met with almost instantaneous success, first winning the All-Stars Karting Championship in Malaysia in 2011. In that same year, he was also picked as one of 3 finalists in Sahara Force India's 1 in a Billion driver hunt, and thus essentially secured his junior motorsport career. And while that didn't last, it did at least prove that he was a special talent, quite literally one of 3 in a couple million. In 2012, he won the Asia Pacific Karting Championship at the season finale in Macau. The next season, he moved to England thanks to his new Force India backing, and competed in the International Super Cup. He then competed in the Junior World Karting Championship that same year, sandwiched in a second place between winner Lando Norris and third place Mick Schumacher. He was able to beat out the likes of Max Futrell, Dan Ticktum, Sergio Sette Camara, Robert Schwartzman, and In 2014, he would compete in the FIA World Karting Championship, where he would finish a very respectable P3 behind winner Norris and, oh god. He also competed in the 2014 German Karting Championship, where he finished second in the standings. So what we have here is a consistently good karter who's able to keep pace with Lando Norris, who, according to Wikipedia, is officially defined as kind of fast. Right. Naturally, the next step for Jehan was to move up into cars, and he began racing first in Formula Renault. He first raced in the 2015 Northern European Cup with Fortec Motorsports. Overall, he finished P5 and ahead of all his teammates. He also raced in the Alps Series and the Eurocup Series, albeit as guest driver, so we aren't going to count those. The next year, he switched to Joseph Kaufman Racing and paired with Lando Norris and Robert Schwartzman.
Did you forget about me?
He competed full-time in the Eurocup and again in the Northern European Cup. In the Eurocup, teammate Lando Norris dominated the series with 12 podiums and 5 wins, but Jehan could only finish P9 with a single podium behind teammate Schwartzman. In the Northern European Cup, he finished a much improved P4 with 5 podiums and 1 win. Keep in mind, this was the first ever victory by an Indian driver in an FIA sanctioned event, which is pretty damn impressive. However, Lando would once again convincingly defeat Daruvala with 11 podiums and 6 wins. There is consolation in the fact that he beat Schwartzman, who was 6th in the standings. He also raced in the 2016 Toyota Racing Series with M2 Competition. No, not that M2, the other M2. M2 competition's a bit like the Prema of the Toyota Racing Series. You were kind of expected to win, or at least take P2 or P3 in the championship. And that's exactly what Jehan did. Almost. You wanna guess why? Now Lando scored 11 podiums and 6 wins compared to Jehan's 6 podiums and 3 wins. Now that might sound bad on paper, but Jehan was only 135 points behind. So theoretically with 2 more rounds, Jehan would have been able to catch up and maybe pass Lando for the championship. Jehan would take a second shot at the crown for the Toyota Racing Series in 2017, this time partnered with Marcus Armstrong at M2 Competition. He finished P5 in the standings with 9 podiums and 2 wins, but ultimately fell 11 points shy of teammate Armstrong. That year would also be his rookie season in the European Formula 3 Championship. Jehan would race with Carlin for his rookie season in the series, partnering this guy and Lando Norris. Seriously, this guy can't escape Lando. Or maybe Lando can't escape him. While Jehan finished a respectable P6, Lando Norris dominated the season with 20 podiums and 9 wins, compared to Jehan's puny 3 podiums and singular win at the Norris Ring. Interestingly, he was the only full-time driver to finish every single race of the season, and managed a P10 finish at the Macau Grand Prix. Daruvala stayed with Carlin for the 2018 season, but he couldn't replicate the previous year's success. He finished 10th in the standings, albeit ahead of all of his teammates with 5 podiums and 1 win. At the Macau Grand Prix, he was caught up in that incident and managed to finish the race in P12 despite that. Of course, I'm not going to show the incident for those of you who want to watch it, just look up Sophia Flörsch Macau Grand Prix. Obviously, Jehan didn't let these disappointing results get to him as he moved up to the 2019 FIA Formula 3 Championship. Jehan would race for Prema Power Team, teamed with Marcus Armstrong and Robert Schwartzman. Could he really have picked harder teammates? I'll go race by race because this is probably the best way to gauge Daruvala's skill in a mainstream series, so I'll try to get through this fast. Round 1, Spain. In race 1, Jehan would take P7 while teammate Schwartzman took the win and other teammate Armstrong took P3. In race 2, having qualified on the front row due to his P7 in the previous race, he took the lead into turn 1 and never gave it up. Round 2, France. Jehan, after falling down to P3, makes passes on Pedro Piquet and Jake Hughes to take a second win of the season. In the sprint race starting P8, Jehan took a strong podium while teammate Schwartzman took the win for Prema. Round 3, Austria. In race 1, Jehan kept his nose clean and finished P4 after he failed to take the position from Marcus Armstrong on the final lap for the final step of the podium. In race 2, Jehan ran in P4 for the most of the race until Armstrong decided that he wanted to take a piece of Schwartzman's wing to hang on his wall at home. Even worse luck for Schwartzman, Mick was taking notes. Oh god. Jake Hughes inherited the win after Schwartzman's penalty, and Jehan took P2 afterwards. Round 4, we go to Silverstone. In race 1, Daruvala held second position after a good getaway off the line and pressured eventual race winner Juri Vips through the entire race, while defending hard from teammate Armstrong behind. Race 2 saw a streak of podiums run out after a collision with Pedro Piquet broke his front wing and forced him to retire. So we're halfway through the season and the top 3 are here. Schwartzman has the championship lead with 114 points. Jehan's only 12 points behind, sitting on 102. In third is high-tech driver Juri Vips, who we know is super talented, and sitting on 92 points. So at this point, Jehan isn't that far out of the title contention, but we'll see how he does in the second half of the season. Round 5, Hungary. In race 1, Daruvala started 17th on the grid and had a relatively quiet race, but managed to pull back to P11, still out of the points. In race 2, he managed to pull up to P7, but with Armstrong and Schwartzman both finishing in the podium places that weekend, admit that Jehan was now on the back foot. Round 6, Belgium. After qualifying on pole, Daruvala held the lead into turn 1 but lost it on the long Kemmel straight. After falling down to P4, he pulled back to P2 before Schwartzman made his way past. He managed to hold on to another solid podium. In race 2, we didn't see much action from him as he held the P5 he qualified on from the race before and ended up behind teammates Schwartzman and Armstrong.
And Felipe Dragovic.
Round 7, Italy. While Armstrong and Schwartzman were battling for the lead with Zandelli, Lundgaard, and later with each other, Daruvala sat right behind them and rounded out the all-Prema podium. At a wet Monza, Jehan dropped all the way down to P11 and couldn't find the pace he needed and kept falling back to P13. So we're at the final race in Sochi and Jehan is 33 points behind Schwartzman. A possible feat assuming he can get at least P2 in the feature race and a win in the sprint race. But what he failed to account for was teammate Armstrong making a strong comeback in the championship. So it's the final round in Sochi and Daruvala has to get a P2 and make sure that Schwartzman DNFs and he falls back to P6. So Schwartzman wins the title and we haven't even gotten to the final race yet. In race 2, Jehan stalled the car on the start and was relegated to a pit lane start. He managed to pull up to P14, but of course that means he doesn't score points. Because teammate Marcus Armstrong had the fastest lap and scored a podium, he lost his P2 in the standings to Armstrong by 1 point. Well, that's disappointing. No pun intended. Painful as that loss was, his early year results turned the one working eye of Helmut Marko to him, and so he was signed to the Red Bull Junior Academy at the beginning of 2020. This was a massive step for him as he'd be competing in a top car with Carlin and against a very competitive teammate, Yuki Tsunoda. We'll come back to him in a bit. Round 1, Austria. Jehan's race was done at turn 3 after being punted by teammate Yuki Tsunoda on the opening lap. Not exactly the best way to open out the season, but he finished the race in P12. Jehan's sprint race wasn't much better, finishing P16. Austria for round 2. Daruvala slowly fell from P7 to P12 at a wet track, as his teammate took a strong P2 after some radio miscommunication cost him the lead. In the sprint race, Daruvala took P9 just outside of the points as Tsunoda's engine had a Honda moment. Hungry for round 3 in race 1, after starting from the back of the grid, Daruvala pulled the car all the way to P6 and his first points in Formula 2. Starting P3 for the sprint race, Daruvala lost 5 positions on the exit of turn 1, eventually gaining a position back but ultimately finishing P7. We go to Britain for round 4. In race 1, Jehan moved a few positions up and down but ultimately finished P10, while his teammate took a second podium of the year. In the sprint race, he sat in P12 for the majority of the race, but a safety car allowed him to climb to P4 in the remaining 9 laps, with both UNI Virtuosi spinning out of contention and his teammate Tsunoda spinning out on lap 1. Back to Britain for round 5 for the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. Despite taking the fastest lap of race 1, Daruvala finished in P12, 5 places behind his teammate, thus not qualifying for fastest lap points. And while Tsunoda took the win in race 2 and the Premas had a Brazil moment, Daruvala took another P9 just outside the points. We go to Spain for round 6. After running as high as P11, the safety car came out at the wrong time, and after the second safety car with 1 lap to go, Daruvala found himself in P19, the last of the remaining drivers. And while he made up 3 positions on the final lap, his teammate ultimately finished P5 and significantly ahead of Daruvala. At the sprint race, he wasn't much better, finishing a lonely P15. So here we are at the mid-season markers. Daruvala is 15th in the standings with 18 points, whereas Tsunoda is still in the title hunt, 4th in the standings with 82 points to his name. That's almost 5 times the number Jehan has. Now this especially doesn't look great when you consider the fact that this was expected to be one of the best team rivalries of the season, but Daruvala just hasn't been performing close to the level that Carlin has expected. So first race after the mid-season break, round 7 in Belgium. Daruvala was all but last of the finishing drivers, only ahead of and in the feature race he wasn't much better with a terrible P16 finish. Jehan attributed these terrible results to a faulty engine that cost him up to half a second on the straights. Mind you, he had been running on the same engine for the entirety of the year, meaning that perhaps his problems weren't just on him. But with 4 rounds to go, we see a big turnaround for Jehan as his new engine would power him to score points in all but 2 of the next 8 races. Round 8, Italy. Monza being a high-speed circuit, the new engine helped out massively, keeping him from falling back and ending with the P10, while teammate Yuki went on to get a respectable P4. And in the sprint race, despite dropping back 2 places at the start, he moved up to P7 by the end of lap 8 after his teammate's engine decided to have a Honda. Yeah, you get it, let's move on. And after Dan Ticktum was disqualified for an insufficient fuel load, he was promoted up to P6. Round 9, Tuscany. Jehan had a relatively quiet race, keeping P11 until the very end and eventually getting into the points on the final lap. Jehan was running in P5 in the sprint race after the 2 high-tech drivers took each other out, before Guan Yu Zhou and Callum Ilott eventually got past. Round 10, Sochi. After a Carlin front row lockout, Daruvala lost a place to Schumacher off the start, and the early pit stop on lap 7 didn't work to his favor, yet he managed to still finish a respectable P5 while teammate Tsunoda was giving people a reason to watch the Russian Grand Prix. After running in P4 in the early stage of the sprint race, Jehan dropped down to P7 and dropped back even further after a penalty for breaching track limits at turn 2, thus putting him in 11th. This would be the first of 2 non-points finishes after his engine change. And now we go to Bahrain for the final 4 races of the season, and we see some of the best driving we have ever seen from Daruvala so far. And, well, I'll let the replay do the talking. Yep, that's Daruvala, keeping Schumacher, who's on fresher tires, behind. And thus, he scores his first podium in FIA Formula 2. In the sprint race, Daruvala was running in P4 and closing in on the podium places before Callum Ilott tried to pull the Schumacher 1997 on Schumacher 2020, to about the same effect, locking up and taking out the Rubula instead. So it's the final round in Bahrain again. Jehan kept his late season momentum going, something he usually didn't do in past seasons when he would sort of run out of steam. In the feature race, Jehan scored a quiet yet critical P7, while teammate Tsunoda and high-tech driver Mazepin were busy reenacting the Russia-Japanese War. Why could P7 be critical? Because it means he starts on the front row for the final race of the season. And guess what he did? After battling with Schumacher, who was threatening him from behind, Daruvala went ahead and took the win from future teammate Dan Ticktum, with Tsunoda following behind to take P2. Spectacular driving at the end of the season for him. Definitely shows that he was on an upward streak. With his performance in the final rounds, Jehan proved that he indeed was a special talent as we've seen before, and that he was worthy of keeping his place on the Red Bull Junior team. Maybe if his engine wasn't sandbagging, he may have been much higher up in the standings early on in the season. With Gasly rumors to Alpine, there is potentially an AlphaTauri seat up for grabs in the future, and with Liam Lawson, Yuri Vips, and Dan Ticktum all gunning for the same seat, Darvala will not just prove that he's best of the rest, but that he's also Formula 1 worthy. Jehan took part in the FIA Asian Formula 3 series to get some more super license points. Jehan raced for the Mumbai Falcons, beating out all his teammates and finishing 3rd in the standings, thus elevating his super license points count to 33. Given that, he would need 7th or higher in the FIA Formula 2 Championship to qualify for a super license. So, is Jehan a Formula 1 worthy talent? Is he India's next Formula 1 driver? And the answer is probably. He has some skills to work on. His starts are terrible, his tire conservation is not great, and his qualifying is inconsistent. But for every con, there's a pro. His race pace is actually quite good. His attack and defense are also very good. He doesn't tend to crash the car, and when his qualifying is good, he's able to put it near the top of the grid. So we'll have to see just how well he performs in the 2021 FIA Formula 2 Championship in order to see whether he is deserving of his Formula 1 seat. Anyways, that's it for me. I'm dead.